Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Rothman Lecture. I'm Stefan Gravenstein, the David S. Greer Professor of Geriatrics and Palliative Medicine here at Brown. And today I have the pleasure to welcome you to the 2021 Frank and Joan Rothman Lecture. I'd like to start by telling you a little bit about the Rothmans and the Rothman Lecture. So the lecture was established in 1995 by President Vartan Gregorian to recognize the career-long contributions to Brown University made by Frank Rothman. Frank Rothman had stepped down as provost that year, and also by his wife, Joan. As a scholar, Frank Rothman was an organic chemist, molecular geneticist, and he pioneered regulation of gene expression in bacteria and molds, leading to his founding of the graduate program in molecular and cell biology. As an educator, he taught biochemistry and genetics, molecular biology and aging. He won several teaching awards, and as a leader, he went on to become Dean of Biology and eventually the Provost. After his retirement, he remained active with the Progeria Research Foundation and Project Kaleidoscope on undergraduate science education, Joan Rothman met Frank at Harvard, where they studied chemistry together. They married in 1953, came to Providence in 1961. She was a believer in lifelong learning. She went on to earn a master's degree in religious studies here and studied Greek and Hebrew, traveled to archaeological digs and spent time there, lived in Tel Afek in Israel, one of those archaeological sites, and Naples. Each year, the lectureship brings to Brown a scholar to present work either on basic genetic or molecular biological mechanisms. This is the area of Frank Rothman's research, or on contributions to our understanding of how individuals can contribute to their own health, an area of particular interest to Joan Rothman and our speaker today. Joan's joy for life, her strong belief in helping others, and her willingness to share her knowledge and insights give us much to reflect on. Frank and Joan Rothman were married for 67 years, blessed with 4 children, 6 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild. Today, we honor Joan, who passed away last year, with a presentation about grandparenting, a topic that I'm sure was near and dear to her heart. And as an avid daily reader of the New York Times, we have a speaker whose work would be familiar to her. I want to extend a very warm welcome to Dr. Frank Rothman, ADE 65, and all of the members of the Rothman family who are joining us online today. A few housekeeping tips before we begin. You'll find that the chat function is disabled in this webinar, but we invite you to please use the Q&A function along the bottom of your screens to ask questions or make a comment during the lecture. The speaker and I would like this to be a discussion. So when we get ready to have the back and forth, we hope you will share some of your own thoughts on the topics we will be discussing today. With that in mind, I'll introduce our guest lecturer, Paula Spann. Paula spent 16 years as a New York correspondent for the Washington Post Style section and a staff writer for the Washington Post magazine. An inveterate freelancer, she has written for dozens of newspapers and magazines, including New York, Esquire, Glamour, Cosmopolitan, Smithsonian, the Wall Street Journal, the Boston Globe, the Philadelphia Inquirer, and USA Today. She publishes long Q&As for Amazon's Kindle single interview project. She also speaks at conferences and gatherings around the country about aging, and has taught journalism at Montclair State University and was a McGraw professor in writing at Princeton. Her book, When the Time Comes, follows several families caring for aging parents, was published by Hachette in 2009. She now writes the New Old Age column about aging and caregiving for the New York Times. She's also an author of the Puppy Diaries, a guidebook for grandparents, which was just released on Audible. We will put the link to that in the chat box for everyone to see. She's joining us today to present on growing older, aging, caregiving, and grandparenting. Welcome, Paula Spann.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with alumni and members of the Brown community and members of the Rothman family. I'm pleased to be sharing some of the things I've been learning and writing about, thinking about as a Times columnist, as a professor. I'm at the Columbia Journalism School now, and as an old person. There are 100 things I could say about aging and caregiving and grandparenting, and I know because I've been saying them for 10 years or more, and because I'm about to turn 72 this summer. I thought today I'd go in a slightly different direction and talk about the benefits, the assets, the good things about growing older, things that we don't discuss very often. We're a society that celebrates the promise and the energy of youth so profoundly, including on commencements, and we should celebrate that. But we barely acknowledge that there can be anything good about growing older. We're a society that fears and loathes old age. But there can be good things about growing older. I don't want to pretend that everything about aging is rosy and delightful. We all know that that is false. My editor at the New York Times and I have a motto, informally, for the new old age column, which is, "We are not chirpy." We do not write glowing profiles of 80-year-old skydivers, even though there are 80-year-old skydivers, because that is not reality for most people. We understand that bodies and minds falter. We know that most Americans over age 65 have 2 or more chronic medical conditions that they are coping with. We know that our long-term care system, meaning the way we take care of the most vulnerable elders who need daily assistance, is so screwed up that it barely merits the word system. It essentially, our country tells families, this is your problem, you figure it out. And that is wrong, and it's unsustainable, and it's inhumane. And yet, there are some reasons to feel optimistic about the years ahead for many of us. And to be honest, for those of us in particular who have higher education, that privilege, and who have managed to hang on to some degree of economic stability. The disparities in health, in wealth, in the prospects for a later life with some comfort and some dignity, those are real disparities, and they are shameful. But some things do get better. Let's think about the health front, for example. Certain of the disabilities and diseases that we most fear are actually declining in the older population. Like, for example, hip fractures. You probably know about the Framingham Heart Study, started in the 1940s and continuing. Researchers use it to look at other health issues too. And last year, the National Institutes of Health reported that over 40 years, from 1970 to 2010, the incidence of hip fractures actually declined significantly by about 4% per year. This does not seem to stem from improved treatment for osteoporosis or other contributing factors. It comes from reduced smoking, less heavy drinking, and given how disabling and even fatal hip fractures can be, this is good news, and there's more. The incidence of strokes in older people has been falling for more than 30 years. The incidence of heart attacks has declined about 40% just since the 1990s, and deaths from heart attack have reached a historic low. As for what is for some of us the scariest disease of all, dementia, rates have been falling in this country and in other countries for a number of years, and it's not entirely clear why. Better treatment for heart disease seems to be a contributor, less smoking again. Increasing education levels probably play a role. Some people have even suggested that switching to unleaded gasoline is a factor. The number of older Americans with dementia will continue to climb because it is correlated with age, and there will be more older Americans with dementia because there will be more older Americans. But our risks of developing dementia are going down. We are working longer, reversing the trend toward early retirement that we saw a couple of decades ago. This can't be seen as an unalloyed good because some of the people still working might prefer to be retired and can't afford to be. But others are working because they enjoy it. They like feeling useful. They like feeling engaged. Their health and stamina allow it. And so the rates of employment are going up, or at least were until the pandemic, among the older population. This is what economists and financial advisors hope that we will do. keep working, keep paying those taxes, and don't tap Social Security until later. Age discrimination in the workplace is real, and the pandemic has brought hardships for older workers. When they are laid off, it takes them longer to find another job, and when they do, the salary may never be as high as the job that they were forced out of. So that is a serious problem. But it's also true that the expected retirement age of 65 was always pretty just arbitrary, based on a fairly obscure German pension system. The nation could afford to pay benefits to older adults in the 30s because we didn't live very much longer than 65, but now the average 65-year-old can expect to live another 20 years. So some older people want to spend this lengthening period in the workforce, and more of us are. For all that older age is often seen as a time of diminishment and misery, something to make awkward or even insulting jokes about, the fact is that older people report feeling happier. This is the pioneering work of Dr. Laura Carstensen at Stanford University, who developed what you may have seen as the U-shaped curve. The U-shaped curve, that people in their 20s feel pretty good about life. As you hit the bottom around your late 40s, early 50s, you are assailed by the responsibilities and sometimes the disappointments of midlife. And then you start to come back up the other side, and people feel happier about their lives and more content. Older people are better at regulating their emotions, Dr. Carstensen has discovered. They turn toward the people and the practices that bring pleasure and meaning, and they learn to let a lot of the other stuff go. Kayla, can we see that dad photo? I'm going to show you a picture of my father on his 90th birthday. He is proof of concept for me that you can have an active and engaged older life. He was not a college graduate. He was not a marathon runner, but he was having a good time. He was learning, he was engaged with people. This is in his independent living facility. And he achieved what gerontologists call compression of morbidity. He died 4 months after this photo was taken. And that's kind of the way that most of us would like to go. We're fine, until suddenly we're not fine. All our systems begin to collapse, and we die after a fairly short period of disability. So he's my role model. But as far as the happiness of older adults, which he exemplified, we saw this at play during this past truly miserable year. It may seem insensitive to even be talking about happiness when the pandemic is still raging around the globe. Researchers found that mental health took a real nosedive during the year of COVID among all age groups. Anxiety and depression rose, substance abuse rose, suicidal thoughts rose. And you would expect that older people would be particularly impacted because we were physically more vulnerable to COVID-19. We were more confined and isolated in trying to avoid it, and we died from it at the highest rates. And yet, look at these findings from the CDC. It was the youngest group, people 18 to 24, who reported the highest rates of mental health problems. Almost half of them said they were experiencing greater rates of depression and anxiety. Among people in their mid-20s to 40s, it was about a third. But in the group over 65, even though we also had substantial increases, it was single digits. Older people have been through a lot, and we have learned to be resilient. Some of the gains I've been talking about stem from improved public health practices, improved medical treatment. But notice that we also shape our own futures as old people by the things we do or don't do. So let me focus on a couple of things that science shows that we can do individually and collectively to make later life a satisfying and productive time. The simplest thing first. Let me tell you about an intervention. That's what medical school people say, right? An intervention, something that is different from normal. This intervention is something that people of virtually any age can use. And this intervention can protect your cardiovascular health, reduce the risk of osteoporosis, reduce hospitalization for heart failure, reduce depression, help reduce the pain of arthritis, help manage diabetes if you have it, help you avoid it if you don't, lower the risks of falls. If this were a drug, we would all demand a prescription stat. But of course, it's not a drug. It's regular exercise. 150 minutes a week, brisk walking will do. It has an astonishing array of positive effects, and it's almost never too late to initiate it. Consider a study of sedentary men and women. They were in their 70s and 80s. They were not severely disabled. They could walk a quarter of a mile without assistance, but they were not physically strong. They built up to 150 minutes a week of walking, plus a couple of sessions with light weights, and they were followed for 2.5 years. They cut the expected rate of disability in this group by 30%. Let's talk about the hippocampus. It's the region of the brain that controls memory formation. Normally, it shrinks a little bit every year, but if this is a different study, older people walked 40 minutes around a track 3 times a week, plus they did a warm up and a cool down. And afterwards, brain scans showed that the size of the hippocampus in this group actually increased. This is walking, notice, not running, not doing push-ups, not being a gym rat, walking. We have watched with disappointment as a lot of tests and trials for new Alzheimer's drugs have just failed in recent years. And even the few drugs that we have that are FDA approved, they have modest effects. They work in some people and not others. They work for limited periods of time. It is disappointing. We want that drug, but we may already have this potent prevention though. Nobody can tell you that if you exercise throughout your lifetime, you will remain cognitively sharp. But we can say that regular exercise over age 65, regular exercisers over age 65 have half the dementia risk of people who don't exercise. Another thing that we can do to make later life a rich experience is to fight the ageism that we see all around us and that seeks to diminish us and limit us. The term comes from Dr. Robert Butler, the late gerontologist, physician, an author, the first director of the National Institute on Aging. At the time, in 1969, 50 years, we were more used to hearing about isms that reflected race or gender. But Dr. Butler was referring to discrimination and stereotyping on the basis of age. It's a prejudice that's even less logical than the rest of the prejudices, because if we're lucky, it's the minority group that we all get to join. And why are we assailing and putting down the group that we will be part of or are part of? Ageism exists in the workplace. It exists in the healthcare system, in the media. We see it when employers discriminate against employees who are over 40 or 50, when ad campaigns equate attractiveness and vigor with youthfulness, when healthcare providers hear about a problem you have and say, well, what do you expect at your age? Like other kinds of bias, though, it can also operate internally, and it can have real world consequences, pernicious effects. Our own views of age, and remember, we began developing them as very young children, hearing stories about wicked old witches. Our own views can affect us in measurable ways. I'm drawing here on the work of Becca Levy, who's a psychologist at Yale. For more than 20 years, she and her team have been measuring the impact of stereotypes about old age. She and her colleagues have developed a scale to determine whether people see old people as capable, active, full of life, or conversely as grumpy, helpless, other negative attributes. Over and over, they've found that people with more positive views of aging behave differently from people who buy into negative stereotypes, even when those groups are similar in other ways, including their health. Old people with positive views of aging do better on memory tests. They can walk faster. They're more likely to recover fully from severe disability. They have better handwriting. They actually live longer. And it turns out that we can help ourselves acquire those positive views. When Dr. Levy exposed people in their 70s and 80s to an implicit association exercise that bolstered their perceptions of age, they did better in physical tasks weeks later. We need to take ageism seriously and to help beat it back. I invite you to join me in this campaign. One thing that can help, I believe, is to be clear-eyed and not coy about where we are in the life cycle. I'm upfront about my hair color and my age, which remember is 71. I am that scold who reminds people not to tell diminishing jokes about themselves. I have grad students in their 20s. They forget things all the time, but they don't call it a senior moment. They just forget things. Do you look old if you're wearing a hearing aid? No, you look like every millennial walking around with stuff stuck in their ears. In fact, even though the commonly accepted terminology for someone my age is older adult, I frequently say old people. You've heard me say that. I don't like euphemisms. I don't think they work. It's a weird phrase. Every adult is older than some other adult. Besides, whatever phrase we come up with, senior, elder, older adult, golden ager, God help us, people will reject it because the problem really isn't the word, it's the status. It's that people don't want to be old. Well, acceptance starts with facing realities. I'll soon be 72. I'm old, and that's okay. It doesn't tell you anything else about me except the year I was born. Kayla, can we look at that poster? I invite you to adopt my motto, and a friend turned it into a poster. Old is not an insult. Young is not a compliment. When it comes to a fulfilling old age, the final element I'd like to address is purpose. Intuitively, we understand what purpose means. What gives you a reason to get up in the morning? All this care we take with our health and our well-being, what difference does it make? In youth and midlife, the roadmap is clearer. We know what we're supposed to do, even if it takes us a while. We get an education. We find work that fulfills us or at least supports us. We form families of various kinds. We engage in communities of various kinds. And then in our later years, it's not quite so clear. Most people will stop working for pay at some point. Most people's children will leave the nest at some point. Trust me on this. But at that point, we are often told, well, we should just relax and enjoy our leisure. And I know that some people do. But remember that long life expectancy. Do I really want to just chill out and do nothing much for the next 20 years? Well, to me, it's not an appealing prospect because then what would be my purpose? In the research world, psychologists define purpose, I'm going to quote them as a commitment to broader life goals that helps organize your day-to-day activities. It's the sense that life has direction and meaning, and researchers can actually measure how much purpose people have. They use questionnaires with statements like, I feel good when I think of what I have done in the past and what I hope to do in the future. Strongly agree, disagree, strongly disagree. Or, I sometimes feel as if I have done all there is to do in life. Agree, strongly agree, etc. And when you tabulate the results, people with purpose, higher purpose scores in later life, this is a good thing on many counts. It's a robust predictor of quality of life. It's associated with feelings of satisfaction and happiness, with better physical functioning, even with better sleep. There's a neuropsychologist in Chicago, Patricia Boyle is her name, who's been tracking cohorts of older adults in Chicago, testing them at intervals. And her team has found that people with high purpose scores were much less likely to develop Alzheimer's disease. They're less likely to develop disabilities in general. A psychologist, Patrick Hill at Washington University, has found that purpose protects against mortality throughout the life course. People with stronger purpose are less likely to be hospitalized for a variety of conditions. They're less likely to suffer strokes. And by the way, having purpose does not rely on good health, because both these teams were controlled for those factors. And all by itself, as an independent variable, a purpose has a potent ability to improve and extend our lives. So it's not that healthy people can find purpose. It's that having purpose helps you stay healthy. How can we hang on to that? Some elders will continue working, and some will find ways to not relinquish work, but to step back. Sometimes this is called phased retirement. You're doing less of it over time, but you're still doing it. Or some will launch what's called encore careers, doing something different than they've done all their working lives. Or they may turn to self-expression, to art, or music, or photography, things that you didn't feel you had time for earlier in life. They may help their families in various ways. Young families need a lot of support. And caregiving, many of us will fill this role. It's not unusual for a 72-year-old to be taking care of a 92-year-old. Or people will work without compensation as volunteers for a program or a cause that they find important. And in doing something useful for others, they will be doing something truly important for themselves as well. Which brings me to my current favorite subject, grandparenting. I acquired this status in 2016, and for the past 4 years, I've been writing a column, an occasional column for the Times called Generation Grandparent, about this new role. And I've adapted those columns into this audiobook called The Bubby Diaries, which Audible just released. And I'm Bubby. Kayla, can you show that cover photo? Most Americans become grandparents in their 50s. I was somewhat surprised to learn. I was 67 when my granddaughter was born. And unlike most milestones in adult life, becoming a grandparent is not something that you can plan for. Whether it happens, when it happens, how often it happens, it's not up to us. And neither is most of what follows when it does happen. But just as some of us are thinking about our later lives and casting about for new sources of pleasure and purpose, here comes a grandbaby or several, and it lands on our adult children like a bomb, remember, and changes everything. America tends to regard caring for elders as a family responsibility and not a social one, and it treats childcare much the same way. You are pretty much on your own. But sometimes Nana or Pop or Bubby can provide some support. I am finding being Bubby very meaningful. And I know that I'm not the only one who feels that way. There is something profound about seeing your children have children, about that legacy extending beyond our own lifetimes, and about helping to shore up the expanding family. There are lots of ways to be a grandparent and to have strong relationships with your children's children. Geography does matter. Health and stamina matter. Whether you're still working or retired, how much time you have matters. But we can still build those connections anyway. Some people are looking forward to moving someplace sunny or someplace rural, and they may be geographically distant. Some people have fond memories as adults of the time they spent as children with their grandparents far away for a week or two in the summer or at Christmas time or a month spent overseas. It was special, even though they lived far away. Plus, this year we have all learned more than we want to know, perhaps, about maintaining connections digitally. Other people live close enough to do what sociologists call intensive grandparenting. I'm in that category. This refers to providing childcare, not a specific number of hours per week or per month, but just making a commitment to providing childcare regularly. And it appears to be a growing category. I travel from New Jersey to Brooklyn one day each week to care for my granddaughter, who's now 4.5. She will tell you that the half is very important. Of her 5 grandparents and grandparent equivalents, I am the only one who lives close enough to do this. So unlike summer visits to or from faraway grandparents, when I show up, it's no big deal. It's not a special occasion. It's just Thursday. But I think I'm the lucky one. Kayla, can we show my Bubby photo? Given the demographic trends of the day, grandparents may have actually greater involvement with their grandchildren. Because after all, given that longer life expectancy that I keep talking about, we will be sticking around longer, and we can watch our grandchildren grow into their teens and perhaps into adulthood. Our families are smaller than in the past, so we have fewer grandchildren to focus on and spend time with. Sometimes people who study family formation call these beanpole families because they're long, they grow high, they go on for a long time, but they're narrow because they involve fewer people as we have smaller families. On the other hand, also for demographic reasons, a child may have a whole lot of grandparents these days. I grew up with 4 when that was the standard number. By college, I was down to 2. But my granddaughter has 5, and it's not uncommon for kids to have 6, 7, 8 step grandparents and grandparent equivalents, primarily because of divorce, both in life, in midlife, and the so-called gray divorces of later life. Even when everybody gets along well without rivalries or resentment, it can make it hard to plan Thanksgiving. But given how significant this life cycle event can be, I've been surprised that there's not more research about it. There's not even a whole lot of conversation between the generations about what shape this relationship will take. And that sometimes can lead to friction and misunderstandings that greater discussion might help prevent. After that usually thrilling announcement, I'm pregnant, or we're pregnant, you're going to be a grandparent. What comes next? I can't claim to be the expert based on having one daughter who has one daughter. Many of you are more experienced on this front, but wouldn't it be helpful to think and talk about what the new parents envision, what they expect or will accept from you, how the relationship will take shape, and what you, the elder generation, are willing or able to provide or offer? How are you going to work it all out? You might be living in the same house or around the corner, across town, across the ocean, but you can still be part of this new person's life. How are you going to handle that? What was that Freud said about what humans need and want, love and work? Grandparenting is both those things. It's not the only way to secure them, even at older ages, but most of us will reach this status. And I'm here to tell you that it's pretty swell. As one grandparent told me, all the joy and none of the responsibility. So I wish we could collectively stop bemoaning the fact that we all age. We lose some ground and we gain some things. We don't stop learning or caring or being part of the world, and we can help defeat that social narrative that says that we do. We can create new responses to aging, help develop age-friendly communities and healthcare systems, and alternatives to long-term care. We can make a difference politically because older adults register and vote at higher rates than younger people. We can make a difference, period. And any of those topics could be another hour-long webinar. But for now, I'm excited to see what we can achieve together. I personally am still working. I teach and report and write. But I also spend a lot of time pushing swings and reading Ferdinand and watching the Muppets. It can be a good time. Thanks so much for listening, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you now too.
Thank you so much, Paula. I really enjoyed that. It is, it's almost like reading your column, but getting it live. so it's fun. It's a long string of ideas about having purpose in late life and how we can foster that among each other, among our own families, and between each other. We have a variety of questions from our audience, and I'd like you to start with one of them. The last question first. For those who don't have grandchildren, how does one substitute?
In a variety of ways, but let's say that you are a person who enjoys interactions with children, because you might not be. And so you're painting, or you're taking photos, or you're learning a new language, or you're still working, or you're engaged in community activities of various kinds to make the world better. But if you like children and you don't have your own, there are children that need your help. And it's been a little difficult this year because schools were on such crazy schedules if they were open at all. And so many community activities had to be shut down. But there is a real need for volunteers to work with kids, to read to them, to help them with homework, in libraries, in schools, in community organizations, that once we're all vaccinated, please, and we're back to a more normal kind of life. If you don't have grandchildren and you want to help the next generation, they will be so happy to hear from you.
Yeah, it's here we had a nursing home and assisted living facility. I was right next to an elementary school. And the highlights of the day for those seniors was when some of the kids would come over to visit, and occasionally the other way around.
Yeah.
You don't have to be in assisted living to do this. You could go to the school and find out, about that. It's I think part of the work is how we find for ourselves as we age the places to go. In one of your columns, you talked about assistive devices and how few people have them. Right. And I think it's just that they don't know.
Well, it's partly that we don't get educated about how to be an older person. There's no guidance counselor telling us like what to do. So, but there are a lot of ways to find out about it, but it requires that we be clear-eyed about the fact that we might need some help. So I wrote recently about assistive devices like raised toilet seats and grab bars in bathrooms. These are things that cost $50. But they're not covered by Medicare, so that's a barrier for some people. But for a lot of people, yes, it may be that you don't know about them, but it also requires being able to say to ourselves, I could use some help. Bathrooms are dangerous. They're slippery. The surfaces are all hard. Would it be such a terrible thing to put up a grab bar? Like even when, if you twist your ankle in your 30s when you're running, you might still be happy to have a grab bar. So it requires a different kind of thought, I think, to ask yourself, what can I do to help keep myself active and participating in the world, rather than being in a state of denial of, I don't need anything, I'm fine. Don't tell me about anything. I don't want to read about things. I don't want to hear about things. It's so self-defeating. There is nothing that's independent about holding onto the walls of your house as you're walking around. The thing that can make you independent is a walker, or sometimes a wheelchair or a cane. And the idea that we would forego that because it makes us look old or dependent, when in fact it achieves the opposite, it is very frustrating to people who are trying to work with elders. It's disabled advocates in the disability community will tell you, they tell us what language they prefer for the media to use. And they say, do not say confined to a wheelchair. A wheelchair is not what confines us. A wheelchair is what lets us participate in the world. And I take that to heart. I think you're muted, Stefan. I can't hear you. Sorry. I'm still not hearing.
It isn't about what you can't do. It's about what you can do. And speaking of wheelchairs and walking, you've advocated here for exercise, and that some of the data that supports that this is an intervention that people can take to heart. We had a couple of questions around that exercise, and one of them was two parts. How briskly do you have to walk? How do you define that? And is there enough benefit to just walking moderately? And so, can you say something about that?
There is benefit to walking moderately. There is benefit to walking, period. But if you can build up to going, my understanding as not a exercise physiologist, my understanding is that if you can build up gradually to going a little faster than a stroll, enough to stress your heart a little bit and leave you maybe a little bit out of breath, that's what does the most good. But you don't have to start that way. And you don't have to start doing a mile or 2 miles. And physical therapists are really good at helping people with this. And also there are exercise programs for older adults at YMCAs, the Silver Sneakers program that AARP supports. There are a lot of programs for older adults who want to get fit and don't want to be in classes with 20-year-olds in spandex. So you can find people to exercise with and to help you. And it's easier to keep at it, to keep with make it a habit when you're with other older people, because you become your own support group. And if you don't show up for 2 weeks, someone's going to call you and say, well, where are you and are you okay? So to find a group, I think, has benefits in order to keep you moving, but it also has benefits in terms of socialization, which is important also for healthy aging.
Yeah, and so answer to what does briskly mean is sort of what you can do safely.
It's what you can do safely, but pushing yourself a little. So it's not the speed at which you would perhaps walk through a museum or a beautiful garden. It's and I guess for every person, briskly is slightly different. For me, it's a little faster than I might want to be going, so that I'm a little out of breath, because I want to be using my lungs and my heart more than if I'm sitting around.
Yeah, and there was one researcher that said, if your goal for this is not just to be healthy, but to keep yourself from falling, there is a gait speed that's associated with reduced risk of falling, and I think it's something like 100 steps a minute.
And there also are balance programs that physical therapists and certain healthcare systems offer to help you hold on to your balance. Because yes, it's true, you're trying to stay generally healthy, but the primary reason that older adults go to an emergency room is not heart attack, it's falls. And falls can be devastating to anybody, but to older adults in particular, and take a lot of recovery. So that's why grab bars. That's why taking up the scatter rugs. And that's why walking and exercising and learning to keep your balance are important.
That's really a perfect segue into the next question, which deals with fear of falling. One of the consequences of falling is, of course, the fear, which then can paralyze folks. The question is, do you have any suggestions about how to counter that fear that can interfere with people getting out for that 150 minutes a week of walking? And they acknowledge that these ideas about Tai Chi or balance exercise, but they want to know about the psychological aspect.
There has been research showing that fear of falling actually contributes to falling, because it keeps you more sedentary and fearful of moving, which is counterintuitive, but walking and exercise and balance training help prevent falls, even if you're afraid of them. How do you get over it? I wish I had boned up on this, but I know that there are fall prevention programs in many medical systems, and your doctor or geriatrician should know about them, because a number of researchers have figured out what helps prevent falls, what specific exercises, what kinds of exercises, and in some cases, probably what psychological issues that you need to talk through. So I would Google fall prevention programs in your area. I would ask your healthcare provider. They do exist. They have good results. And if what's holding you back from exercising is that you have fallen or you're afraid that you might fall, I would look into fall prevention. And one of the things they will tell you is have an occupational therapist come, or look at this checklist and try to make your home more fall proof. So take up the scatter rugs. Don't have all those wires from your computer and your video cam that you can trip over. Put in the grab bars, raise the toilet seat. There are There are things you can put next to your bed to help you get up out of bed safely. There's a lot of equipment and a lot of people who know how to do this, and you just have to connect with them.
Yeah. There's also, development of new devices that can assist with fall prevention, which goes beyond just canes and walkers. So there's quite a bit out there. There was also a comment related to one of our earlier questions about older adults getting in with kids, experience course to help in schools.
Experience Corps is a program started in Baltimore by a geriatrician, Linda Freed. It's such an interesting program because these were not healthy brown alumni that were in Experience Corps. These were low income older people, and they already had some degree of cognitive impairment. But if you trained them, and this was pretty rigorous training over a period of weeks, if you trained them to work in public schools with kids, they did so well. And the kids did well too. It was a total win-win. And the rates of disability, of cognitive impairment went down also. So AARP has picked this up, Experience Corps, CORPS, and it exists around the country. And there are similar programs that need your help.
Thank you. There's have you read much about 65 plus people who go back for more higher education as a step toward an encore career? Is this often successful, or instead just an interesting detour that doesn't lead to the desired new job?
I do not know. I cannot answer that question. I know that there's a rising rate of enrollment in higher education by older people. What results after that, I don't know. I think probably a lot of people are doing it for the intrinsic stimulation and interest of it, and not looking for a career after that. So I don't know. I also know that there's a small but growing trend toward having assisted living facilities affiliated with colleges, and either on college campuses or adjacent to them, to facilitate both the older people enrolling in and attending classes, or if not fully degree programs, classes. And because we know that one of the things that reduces ageism is to have intergenerational contact. So if you're the older person in a history class, chances are that the other younger people in the history class will have better views of older people because they've met you and heard from you. But what happens in terms of if someone gets a degree and after that, don't know. If anybody looking for a dissertation topic, here's a good one.
One of our attendees wants you to repeat the title of your New York Times column on caregiving.
Oh, the column is called The New Old Age, and it appears twice a month online and in the print Science Times section on Tuesday. The other column is called Generation Grandparent, and that is online only and appears irregularly when I get the time to write one. And the audiobook, just to complete the trilogy here, is called The Bubby Diaries, which is what I wanted to call the grandparent column for the New York Times. This is not the way the New York Times rolls. Like they said, no one's going to know what a bubby is in between New York and LA. And I said, well, okay. But Audible let me use the title that I wanted.
The next one is, my mother-in-law died a couple of years back at 94. She's my role model. She never let anything or anybody upset her. She was always positive, even in challenging times. I think that was the reason for her longevity.
I think you could find a psychologist that would agree with you. You don't want to be Pollyanna or avoid looking at reality, but having a positive view of aging is associated with better aging. And it'd be interesting to see how far down the life cycle that goes. If you have positive views of aging in your 50s, do better if you're in your 60s. But it's nice for us to be able to see people who are aging into their 80s and 90s, my dad, Jimmy Carter, other people, and to counter that narrative that, it's all over at 60. What a canard. I get mad about it.
Yeah. Okay. Here's another one. After my mom, age almost 92, fell on a walk with me 10 years ago and needed stitches in her head at the ER, I took her to the REI and bought her titanium trekking poles. She has used these walking, shopping ever since. No further falls so far, thankfully.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, I have heard about this and seen it, and some people like it better because like hiking poles, trekking poles, well, first of all, they're strong. And I think for some people, they're not age associated. You know, if you're hiking in the Himalayas and you're 37, you could be using these poles. So somehow they seem better than a cane or a walker. And I think they're certainly less expensive than falling in every way. So great. It's a good thing to pass along. If she was happier with those, if she would use them, because a lot of times people get assistive equipment and it stays in a closet because it's for old people and I'm only 80. So whatever people will use that's helpful and prevents falls, that's great.
Yeah, I completely agree. This next one is from Peter McMenamin. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, from class of 72. He wrote that he spent much of his professional career as a health economist examining Medicare and projections with respect to Medicare patients and demand for Medicare providers. Uh, he goes on to say, one of my last projects involved projections of deaths among the elderly. There are no official estimates from Medicare or Social Security, but there is a way to use data to forecast. The Medicare population will continue to grow in numbers throughout the century, but it's beginning to growth slowdown that will continue to mid-century. Blame it on the boomers who turn out not to be immortal. The average age of the Medicare population continues to remain about 80 years old. The leading age of the boomer generation hits 80 in 2026. And there will be more deaths in total than so far observed due to COVID in the US. We will wind up with thousands of centenarians, but many will not survive to 80. I'm not aware of anyone who can distinguish between 80 plus survivors and the others, but planning for the post 80 will be a challenge.
True, it will be a personal challenge and a challenge for Medicare because our healthcare costs go up with age. So, you know, if we wanted to frame it this way, staying healthy is a patriotic act because we will require less money from Medicare and help keep Medicare solvent longer. But of course, we can't do that ourselves. There are things that have to happen to keep Medicare solvent. It is much harder than trying to keep Social Security solvent. So thanks for the observation. Yeah, it is going to be a challenge. Having more, this was not something that anybody really planned for. You know, medical science, as you know, can kind of go full steam ahead without thinking much about the consequences. And so we will save lives. We'll save lives from heart attacks. We'll save lives from strokes. We'll save lives from fall. And now we have people surviving, many of them for longer. And it's expensive to take care of them. How are we going to do that? So this is a big issue that I hope your successors in studying healthcare policy are figuring out answers to, because we do need answers.
That was great. So you've seen changes in seniors' perspective regarding assisted living and nursing home facilities. And the question is given the last year, what is this going to look like when there is still a choice? Will people forego proper care later in life for fear of being kept from loved ones?
We certainly do not know this, but we do know that, but first of all, nursing homes are not the place that anybody ever wants to go. It's an entire industry based on offering a service that nobody really wants, but that some people need. And nursing homes and assisted living, senior facilities in general, the industry now has a lower occupancy rate than ever since the industry started keeping track of this. So in addition to, and some of this is probably from deaths in nursing homes, and some of it is from people saying the last place I want to put my elder relative right now is in any kind of congregate setting. But these places do serve a function. So I think at some point we will probably start to see occupancy go up again. They've done a pretty good job at vaccinating their population, way ahead of the general population. But the other thing that I'm noticing, and you maybe too, is a grassroots effort to try to find different ways of caring for older people who can't live independently alone, but don't want to be in those kinds of settings. So you'll see things like co-housing, where, well, first shared housing, where there are a lot of older people who are house poor. They live in homes with extra rooms and they're alone in them. And so to have a community organization that matches those people with carefully vetted people who need affordable housing and are willing to pay some rent to decrease the financial stress for the elder, and also to provide some services, some driving, some help with cooking. That's happening. Shared housing, where older people buy homes together. Co-housing, these communities, which can be senior only or mixed ages, where people build or retrofit housing so that a group of older people can live there together, 20 or 30 or 50 people, with common areas and smaller individual homes. And it takes money to do this. It takes organization. People are trying to find alternatives because nobody is really satisfied with the way things are right now. And yet the idea that we can take care of every older person at home is just not realistic.
Thank you for that. We're actually at the bottom of the hour. And so I'd like to thank you, Paula, for this really lifting discussion about aging and our chance, or is it responsibility, at owning our own future. It was a great reminder of what you've been writing about in the New Old Age column in the New York Times, and I'm really looking forward to reading the Bubby Diaries.
Thank you.
Thank all of you who have joined us, and especially for your great questions. And thank you, Frank and Joan Rothman, for making this possible.